Monday night edition of the Anaheim Calling podcast. We are here to discuss maybe the biggest news, Ducks-related news that we have had in quite some time. Pierre LeBrun of TSN and The Athletic over the weekend reporting that Corey Perry is on the trading block. The Ducks and Corey Perry's camp are on the same page, are in communication regarding a potential trade or buyout. It's the first time that we've had actual tangible reporting that Corey Perry is going to be moved or will potentially be moved. Everything in the past has been pure speculation, has been pure rumors, but now we've actually got something that seems pretty much set in stone.
Yeah.
Eric Stevens also confirming that report just hours later. And in addition to that, duly noting that the team has not put anything out there to dispel the notion that this is a real thing. So, Jake, how you feeling, buddy?
How am I feeling? So, I think I'm going to start with, on a personal level, how I'm feeling. Kind of eliminating... I'm going to go into the bias at least right now. Because I think as we move on in this pod...
into it.
Because as we move on in this pod, I'm going to try to put that to the side. As everyone listening to this podcast probably knows, I've been a big defender of Corey Perry over the past 2 years with the hashtag Perry is still good movement, all of that different good stuff. So I obviously have some emotional ties to him. Part of it is just kind of defending him because I thought he was still good. But another big part of it is, honestly, even though I don't think I'd ever consider him my favorite player on the team at any point in time, but I look back on my fandom of the Ducks, and a lot of it is tied into Perry and Getzlaf. I look back into when I really, really got into the team, not just as a kid paying attention or rooting for them because they were my local team, but just actually paying attention. It would be the 05-06 playoffs, and that would have been Getzlaf and Perry's first year. And so a lot of kind of my own fandom kind of grew as they grew into this team and became the leaders, became the main point men on this team. I was there during his Hart Trophy run. I was there for a lot of it. I saw them lift the cup. It was a lot of my fandom is tied to Getzlaf and Perry. And even though there are going to be different styles that I might prefer now over the way Getzlaf and Perry play, a lot of my fandom in hockey is tied to them. And so just from a pure emotional and fan side, it's sad. It's sad the fact that Corey Perry isn't going to finish out this contract and potentially his career with the Ducks. I mean, there was potential where even if he finished out this contract, he may not stay with the Ducks and may go elsewhere. But at least you knew he would finish that contract with the Ducks and had the potential to retire then. And so it's just sad that he's going to end up in another jersey. It's sad that he wasn't able to be here. And I think there was a way, if you looked at it, that he could stay with the team. I mean, they had the space with Kessler and Eves now going on LTIR. The fact that he had his knee redone going to last year, and I thought that it made sense to give him one more season to see if he could kind of regain some of his form and give him a bit more value. And I think that we'll get into this a little bit more, but I still think that probably would have been the preferable path, even looking at it from a non-biased perspective. But, I mean, you look at a lot of the big moments in this franchise's history, and Corey Perry's been there for a lot of them. And so it's a really sad moment, I think, in franchise history.
Right. I think that there's so much to unpack here, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss all of the cap and trade implications, but it is worth noting the kind of historical ramifications here. And, Corey Perry is this team's only regular season MVP. He helped lift that Stanley Cup in 2007. He has a 50-goal season to his name, and he's been synonymous with the Anaheim Ducks for the last decade. Anytime anyone around hockey, around the league, discusses the Ducks, it always starts with Perry and Getzlaf and Perry. That's always been the way that this team has been referred to. And so that era is coming to an end. The biggest shock in this report is not so much that a trade is being explored, but that a buyout is being explored. And so for that to be now on the table basically guarantees that Corey Perry won't be back. If the Ducks ownership is now open to buying out his contract, although it's probably and almost most certainly not the preferred option, that just means they're done with the Corey Perry era. And so, like you mentioned, and I agree with this, although I'm not a fan of the team, it's always a shame when you see a great player who's been, like I mentioned, synonymous with the team for basically an era of hockey. I mean, over a decade. It's just a shame when you see a guy like that not finish out his career with that specific team. We give so much praise, guys who who play an entire career with one team. We hold those guys in such high regard. You think of Joe Sakic, Steve Yzerman. Those are the kind of players that we just hold up in a much different light. I mean, it's such a shame when you think back of like a Jarome Iginla, for example, not finishing out his career with the Calgary Flames.
Matt
so,
Sundin, another one.
Right, exactly.
There's one more that I'm trying to think of that was very notable that went to the Red Wings. Oh, there's actually two, Daniel Alfredson and Mike Modano.
Right, exactly. Daniel Alfredson is actually an interesting comparable because he was part of that 2007 Stanley Cup final against the Ducks. But yeah, it's just one of those things that's a shame. You hate to see it, but this is kind of the reality of the situation. Corey Perry has 2 years remaining on that contract he signed, I believe, the season before he got the Hart Trophy as league MVP, if I'm not mistaken.
Let me double check on that. No, he would have. He signed this extension in the 2013 season.
Oh, okay. So
It was during the lockout shortened season, and if I'm remembering correctly, which I believe I am.
Yeah, he signed. No, he signed this current contract in 2013. And so the season after 2013-14 season.
If I'm remembering correctly, it was his contract was announced, and he signed it because he was suspended.
Which is so Corey Perry.
I think he was suspended. I think it may have been Keith Ballard, maybe in Minnesota. Whatever. I remember the hit specifically and exactly kind of how it was. He came in a bit high, but it was funny. It was like so typical Perry that he was suspended,
right?
And during that time,
was when
Corey
he signed. Thing ever.
Yep.
Which, ironically, that contract that he signed while being suspended is now also the contract that may get him. That is pretty much getting him out of town. He has 2 years left on it at $8.625 million a year in cap hit. He has an $8 million salary next year and a $4 million salary the year after. And he's got, let's see here, he's got a signing bonus of $3 million next in the final season of the contract. So all in all, still quite a bit of actual cash left to be paid out for this contract, $15 million. So the additional factor, another thing that was long considered to make this trade almost impossible, was the fact that he has a full no-move clause. But clearly, the fact that this is being discussed, the fact that both parties, Corey Perry's camp and the Anaheim Ducks, are discussing this, means that not that no-move clause has been officially waived. He has to do that at the time of a trade, but that he's clearly open to waiving it for the right trade or the right situation. It's a shocking development because, like we have discussed so many times in this podcast, there were just so many barriers to this happening. The no-move clause, the sheer term on the deal, and of course, just the fact that Corey Perry is a longtime Duck, and those guys usually don't get traded, or at least it's not something that you see.
Not now, and not as
so
like a
often.
Salary dump. Not exactly in this way specifically. It's usually them forcing their way out, and I think that's kind of an interesting point to transition to, is that he is willing, like you said, to waive his no-move clause. And I think a point that should be made is I've seen a couple people on Twitter confusing him willing to waive his no-move clause to meaning that he'll go anywhere. That's not necessarily the case. It's he
still has to sign off on a trade.
He has a full no-move clause, so it's not as if he just says, I'll waive it, and then he can be traded anywhere. That thing's still intact, and the Ducks have to come to him with the team that he will be traded to, and then he has to approve it. So let's just say, for instance, I don't know, the Canucks come in with a deal for Perry. Perry does not want to go to Vancouver for whatever reason. He can say no. It has to be a team that he wants to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings up an interesting talking point, though, as to one of kind of my biggest things is I didn't think this deal would ever come to pass or a trade would ever happen, simply because he had the full no move clause and he's been here his whole career, and it made sense to me that he would probably want to stay here. So what do you think has caused that? And this is all pure speculation, but what do you think has made him okay with moving it? Because as I've made the point many a time that players negotiate and bargain for those no move clauses. That is something that is most of the time some money is left on the table. And now whether that was the case with Perry, we don't really know. We don't know if that was just like a start, like if it wasn't a full no move clause, he wouldn't sign the deal. Who knows? But he negotiated that no move clause into his contract. So it's odd to me that he's willing to waive it, if that makes sense.
Right. It is certainly bizarre, but I guess this is maybe a good launching pad into the broader discussion. But how did we get here, right? How did we get to the point where Corey Perry is now basically done with the Ducks? I mean, again, it feels weird to say it with such certainty, but all the reporting definitely is trending in that direction. So how did we get here? Well, if you look at all of the Ducks' failures, quote unquote failures in the playoffs, Bob Murray has never explicitly blamed Corey Perry for any of the kind of famous or infamous defeats, but he's certainly
insinuated
done everything short of being explicit. You know, the leadership group, the veteran core, there's always been seemingly a frustration between the Ducks and Perry in that regard, which kind of sucks if you think about it, because usually you don't lose because of your best players. You're pretty much in the position you are because you have those great players. It's usually, especially in hockey, it's usually a bad bounce or goaltending or a lack of depth. It's very rarely because your top players are just awful. And make no mistake, I'm not trying to absolve Perry of any blame, but I do think that being consistently cast in that light may not have been the best for this relationship between the front office and Corey Perry. Now, in addition to that,
real quick, just for reference on that whole playoff not performing moniker that he has 89 points in 118 playoff games, including 36 goals. In the 14-15 season, he had 10 goals. The 08-09 run, he had 8 goals. 06-07, obviously, he had 6 goals.
All his fault?
There obviously have been some where he hasn't put up as many. He put up 4 goals in 13-14 and 13 games. Put up 4 goals and had some zeros, but that's going to happen every once in a while for a goal scorer. He's going to go hot. He's going to go cold. That's just bound to happen, but he's scored in the playoffs. 89 points in 118 games is pretty damn respectable in the playoffs.
Should have been 118. Oh, God. I can't see Jake's face right now, but I'm assuming it has some type of exasperated expression on it.
Yes.
And the other factor, and this is probably the biggest one, well, it's a two-pronged factor. It's the fact that Corey Perry's 34. Has been reasonably productive in his last 2 healthy seasons, 49 points in 17-18, and I believe 53 points the year prior. But since those 2 seasons, he's had a major knee surgery. And when he returned, and again, I don't think it's completely fair to grade him on the 31 games he played this past season, but I'm sure that's factoring into the calculus here. He had 10 points in 31 games. And although he had spurts where he looked good, it didn't look like an instant snap of the fingers rebirth. And for a team that's pivoting towards youth, that's thinking about making changes, that probably was enough to maybe justify a decision that had been brewing underneath the surface.
It definitely took him a good, I don't know, it seemed like 10, 15 games to kind of get his legs back underneath him. And once those were, it seemed like he had, obviously he had some down games, but I felt like for the most part he looked closer to his old self, I would say.
Right.
Not exactly there, but you could see pieces of it in those games. And so that is kind of a big reason why I was always the believer of, well, let's see what he can do next year off this knee surgery. see what's going to happen there. And I think basically if they are willing, if they do want to trade him and do want to move him, the time to do it, in my opinion, is not now. His trade value at the current moment is probably at the lowest that it will ever be. He played 31 games this past year, came back off a knee surgery, only put up 10 points in those games, had 2 down seasons in terms of points, is going to be 34. Basically, all signs are pointing that he's kind of going down if you're looking at it from kind of a big picture perspective as another general manager. His value is probably never as low as it's going to be right now. Now, yes, he probably could come back and not perform well, but I would argue that his value at the trade deadline or next summer will be exactly the same now, maybe even higher, simply because there's only 1 year left on his deal, whereas right now there's 2 years. If he were to come back and perform well, though, well, then you have a player with more value that can get you a little bit more. And so to me, that would have made the most sense. Obviously, we know as of right now with all the reporting that he's getting dealt this summer. So it's all coulda, shoulda, woulda when talking about what I think they should have done. But to me, that's kind of a big stopping point in my head, or a big thing that's kind of holding me up a little bit, is the fact that there's logically some jumps that they're making to just want to get him off the team.
Right. Well, that's the next question. This is all just a series of questions. Why now? Why now when there's 2 years left? When, like you mentioned, his trade value is presumably at an all-time low. Why do this now? And so there's a couple of things that you could look at. I'm gonna start here, and of course, feel free to jump in. But there's 2 things that jump out at me. The first is that the Ducks are obviously going through a rebuild, a retool, whatever the hell you want to call it. They're going through a re-something, right? Yeah. And right now, the Ducks have a logjam basically at both wings, right and left. And outside of Corey Perry, they still have Andre Kasha, Jakob Silverberg, Troy Terry, and Daniel Sprong, and Kiefer Sherwood. Yeah. All guys who could very easily be NHL players next season. And I haven't even mentioned Corey Perry yet. So of those guys, only Jakob Silverberg is a veteran at this point. The rest are youngsters that they probably want to see more of. So that's my first thing. My second thing, and this is a bit more speculative, but it's that the Ducks didn't make the playoffs this season. They haven't made the playoff. Well, they made the playoffs last season, but they only got 2 home games out of it. Yeah. The Ducks are not a team that's flush with cash, and so they missed out on some revenue. And that revenue, I'm sure, has kind of buoyed the franchise along with their consistent playoff appearances. And so maybe the prospect of having to pay out Corey Perry's $15 million the next 2 seasons. Yeah. So that's factoring in the base salary plus the signing bonus. Maybe for ownership, that's not hugely attractive. Maybe they're maybe a little tighter right now, especially with some of the reinvestment that they've been doing in the community, in the deal that they just struck with the city of Anaheim. Maybe it's just from a business perspective and from a hockey perspective, it's getting a little tight to keep Corey Perry around. Yep. Which again is not. I'm not presenting this as a justification per se, but I think these are the factors that are going into it.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've tried to do with putting aside my biases, trying to kind of assess why now, why make this move now, different things outside of the reasonings for Perry wanting to waive his no move clause. I mean, very well, Anime Holic brought up, Perry may want to move because he may want to be on a competitive team with the team potentially being in a retool rebuild. And so kind of looking at it from a Ducks perspective, though, as to why now. If you look at the salary cap, so let me go ahead. I'm going to bring up, I have a test roster up on the screen right now, and I actually now have transitioned. So I'm going to kind of break down where the Ducks roster is right now in terms of guys on LTIR, what that's going to do to the cap, what that's going to do. So as of right now, per cap friendly, they're showing that only 18 guys are on the roster. I know Felix is absolutely loving this right now, all of the different stuff on the screen. But you can see that right now with 18 guys on the roster, the Ducks have a cap space of 9.125, and that's with Eves and Kessler on the cap. So But when you bring up enough guys to fill up all the roster spots, like a Sam Steele, like a Max Jones, and that fills up, I believe that is enough. Oh no, we need one more forward there, and then so that gets us to enough forwards, and we are now at 6.4 in terms of cap space. And so basically, kind of at the end of the day, the Ducks will end up with about 4 or 5 mil in cap space for about 2 players is what they'll need. Or sorry, let me think about that. 4 players in order to get 2 more defensemen onto this roster, or 3 more defensemen onto the roster, and another goaltender. And so, but that is enough space to work with, and that is before even using any LTIR. So with LTIR, the Ducks will have about 9 extra mil on top of that. So they have plenty of cap space. This is not a move, and sorry for kind of the long-winded way around, but this is not a move made to get cap space for this team. They have about 4 mil in cap space right now, and then once you use long-term injury reserve, which per cap friendly can be done in summer, so they can use it in the summer. They're also allowed to go over the cap by 10%. They can use LTIR in training camp. Basically, they can use it whenever they want. The only issue that you can get into with long-term injury reserve is the fact that you do not accrue cap space with long-term injury reserve. So guys on entry-level contracts, if they hit a bonus, there is an overage for that over summer that comes away from your cap if you have accrued cap space. If you don't, then it takes away from your cap space next year. So that it could hurt their cap next season. But basically, long story short, now the Ducks will have plenty of cap space. So that would not be the reason they make this deal. The reason they make this deal is, in my personal opinion, like you said, to save money. They want to get out of the actual $8.625 million for the next 2 years, whether that is by buyout or by trade. They want to get out of that money owed and bring down the actual balance of the roster in terms of actual money owed. And the other issue is, as you can see right now on the screen, there's Perry, Silverberg, Kasha, Sprong, Sherwood on that right-hand side, and Troy Terry also, who I threw on the left wing side for now, but he is a right wing. So there isn't exactly space. So at this point, it feels like the Ducks are basically choosing Daniel Sprong over Corey Perry, which isn't the worst decision in the world. Daniel Sprong is 21 years old. He has a bright future ahead of him. All signs point to him becoming a pretty good NHLer with a pretty good ceiling and will just get better. And so if you look at that right wing side, the fact that all 4 of those right wing slots are already taken is probably the biggest reason why they're looking to move him.
Right. I wouldn't necessarily frame it as they're choosing Daniel Sprong over Corey Perry. It's more like they're choosing the blob of Terry, Sprong, Sherwood. You could even maybe throw Kasha in there. They're choosing that young group of guys over keeping Corey Perry around. I think that's how I would be more comfortable framing it. I don't think you're necessarily wrong, but I don't think they're making the decision based on Daniel Sprong. No. That being said, he has 1 year left before he's an RFA, so they would definitely benefit from giving him an actual shot next year and figuring out what they have in this guy, because he was in and out of the lineup this past season, definitely showed some promise, definitely showed some, he already has NHL tools. The question is, will those be brought out on a night-to-night basis? So really what it comes down to, go ahead.
Really quick though. And I know Tony's going to love me for this, Kempafu. I can't help but come back to the Jakob Silverberg signing as being kind of the last blow for Corey Perry on this team. Because if that contract wasn't signed, then there's that roster spot for Perry. There's enough space on that right-hand side. And the only issue I have now moving forward, and this is kind of another reason why I wasn't exactly particularly thrilled with the Silverberg signing, is the fact that now the Ducks are kind of going to have to try to make a negative value play to get that roster spot open. Whereas they could have made a positive value trade, trading Silverberg for a draft pick or something like that, and getting positive value that will help the team moving forward. As compared to with Corey Perry, they're going to have to probably going to have a negative value overall trade in order to get him off the roster.
Brandon Montour.
What?
They got a first-round pick for him and Brendan Gooley.
Yes.
So there's your positive value trade. No, I
yeah,
mean,
but that didn't open up the roster spot for the right side.
It didn't, but anyway. So let's get into the two. Let's get into the two phases of this. So the first one is trades. We'll get into the buyout perspective afterwards because that's a little shorter.
Yes.
But there's a lot to get through here with the trades. So before we do that, we are going to take a quick break. Okay, so let's get into the trade possibilities for Corey Perry since there's a lot to go over here. So the main thing that's been put out there is that the Ducks will most likely have to retain part of his salary in order to make a deal happen. Now, that's an interesting premise to begin with because, first off, the maximum allowed salary retention in the CBA is 50%. So at most, or I should say at the very least, his cap hit would be $4.3 million a year if the Ducks retained retained half the cap hit, the maximum allowed. So yes, the Ducks would have to retain salary if they want anything back of even partial value, right? So that's what this really, to me, gets into, and that's what makes finding suitable trade partners difficult, is that what are the Ducks really looking to get out of the trade? Because to me, if a buyout is on the table, it just clearly seems to be about getting rid of the contract at any cost. And so there are teams around the league that have a lot of cap space, and there are teams, and I'm just going to jump straight to it here, like the Ottawa Senators, our first candidate, who have a lot of cap space, and not only have a lot of cap space, but actually need to get to the cap floor. And just to double confirm here, I believe that the cap floor is $58 million in 2019 for the current CBA.
I do not know.
$58.8 million
off the top of my head. Okay.
The salary floor it's about mid to high 50s. Let's just ballpark it that way. So the Senators are right now at a $47 million cap hit. They have $35 million in cap space. And so clearly, if you get Corey Perry's salary in there, that definitely helps them get to the cap floor a lot quicker. So the question becomes, would Corey Perry even accept a trade to an Ottawa team that's obviously rebuilding and probably won't be very good next year, although you never know in this league.
You would think that Melnyk, if he's going to acquire a bad contract, is hoping that it's going to be a guy that actually isn't getting paid a whole lot, and it's just there's the cap hit there. And maybe that's the reason why they don't get him. But, I mean, you have to reach the cap floor somehow.
That's the thing, is they have to spend this money.
Yeah.
It's not really a question of what contract you're getting. They have to spend X amount of money regardless. And so I think what's interesting is that Corey Perry, as far as, quote unquote, bad contracts go, he only has 2 years left on this deal.
Yeah.
And we've already covered that this might not be the right time to trade him because his value is at an all-time low, and maybe you can recoup some of that during the season. Of course, it's a gamble, because what if he gets injured again? What if it turns out he's even worse, or just kind of stays at where he was last season? There is some downside risk to keeping him around. But as you will see, that risk might not be that crazy when you look at what they're possibly going to get here. So from the Senators, let's say that the Senators agreed to just take on Corey Perry's, all of his cap hit.
Yeah.
I don't think the Ducks are really getting anything back there. I mean, nothing of value, right? Because
I think
the Senators are obviously doing them a huge favor there.
You and I were talking about this earlier, and Tony was also chatting with us about it, Tony Leo, writer for the site, that most likely you'd probably have to attach a second-round pick to it, maybe even the late first-round pick.
The extra first.
The extra first that they have.
Well, that's the thing, is that Elliot Friedman, you should know who that is, but of 31 Thoughts, Sportsnet, has been pretty vocal on the 31 Thoughts podcast that the Senators are looking to weaponize their cap space in order to get some extra assets, get some futures. And so this situation between the Ducks and the Senators is kind of a shoe-in to that idea that the Ducks have money they want to get off of. And so the Senators can come in and say, hey, well, we have all this cap space. Why don't we just take that problem, quote unquote, problem off your hands and maybe give us a little something so that we do that? Now, my response to that would be, well, okay, sure, you can take this problem off our hands and you're helping us out, but we're also helping you out because you need to reach the cap floor. You have to find a way to get to the cap floor, and Corey Perry helps you get there a lot faster. And he also gives you a brand name. He gives you a guy that you can market around. He gives you a Team Canada guy on a Canadian team. That's always a good tool to at least keep interest for a team that's rebuilding. So I don't necessarily view it as the Senators having all of the leverage here. I think the Ducks
I disagree
can still.
There. I disagree hard there.
Well, the Ducks don't have to trade Perry to the Senators.
No, they don't. The Senators also can go and just overpay for a fourth liner, and that fourth liner will come there for a year because he's going to make bank.
That's true. That's true. I guess if you're the Senators, you could respond and say, well, okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
We'll go give Derek Grant first line center money for a year.
Right. So basically, it does seem like the Senators. I don't think they have all of the leverage, but they have clearly more than 50%, and they could probably hold the Ducks over a barrel. And so I think that if you're the Ducks, the real question, and this is something that we were debating earlier today, is it worth attaching a pick to Perry in order to just completely erase the contract from your books? Because in any of the other scenarios, so let's say you retain salary or you buy him out, you're still on the hook for some of the money.
Yeah, and you're paying a player to not play for you.
Right, exactly, which sucks. I mean, no one wants to do that, even teams that have a lot of money. And so if you can find a scenario where you can just kiss it goodbye and you have to attach a little bit, is there not some value to
that? So this is where you and I didn't exactly see eye to eye earlier today. And that's because I think personally, so here's where I land on that, is that the Ducks, as of right now, I think we can both agree that we're in a retool/rebuild. I don't believe, and I say that because I could be wrong, but I don't believe the Ducks think that they can contend next year. I don't think that Bob Murray is that crazy where he thinks that. Maybe they're trying to make the playoffs still. Maybe that's in their head that they want to do that. But more than likely, they know the situation they're in, that they aren't going to be contending next season. They may contend and think they may contend in 2 years, more likely 3-4 years down the line. So with that being the case, are they really going to utilize that extra $8 million in cap space over the next 2 seasons? More than likely not. They're not going to go out and sign a big free agent. Bob Murray has come out and said that he doesn't view free agency as a way to get guys. He more sees it as a way to kind of get the third liners, the 60, that different type of stuff. That's more how he views the free agent market. He doesn't view it as going out to get basically your first line center. And I think that honestly, as much as it's frustrating, it makes sense because most of the time guys that are hitting the UFA market are going to get overpaid, and you may end up regretting that deal a couple years down the line. But having said that, the Ducks should be accruing as many draft picks as possible. Essentially, they should view the draft moving over these next year or two as a lottery. Not just the draft lottery, but the lottery or the draft as a whole is a lottery, where every single draft pick you get is another ball that you can get out, and another chance to win that lottery and hit it. Granted, a first-round pick has better chances of hitting than a second-round pick, than a third-round pick. But the more you have, the better chances you are at doing that. You should not be trading away those for cap space if you're not going to end up using it. If over these next 2 seasons they don't utilize that cap space, to me, just from a pure hockey roster construction perspective, that's poor management. And the other issue that I'm seeing is, even if they were to trade Corey Perry out and sign a free agent like, let's say, an Artemi Panarin, for instance, and sign him to an 8-year deal, the issue they're going to have is 2 years down the line, when Perry's contract is up, they still have to sign all their future RFAs. And They may be good cap-wise for the next 2 seasons, but down the line when they have to sign Sam Steele, when they have to sign Max Jones, when they have to sign Maxime Comtois, when they have to sign Isaac Lundestrom, if these guys pan out, those second contracts as a whole in the NHL are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So if they pan out and become decent players, they could be on $4 or $5 million deals. And so that adds up. And so to me, you're good with Perry.
But Jake, you're kind of contradicting yourself there, though, because you're saying these guys are going to get really expensive, and so wouldn't it be nice to have more cap space for that if you sign an Artemi Panarin? Because you're saying they're good on cap space and they don't need any more, really, or at least they're going to be okay. So if you free up more and you use that money to get Panarin, you already have the chunk that you were good on to then sign those guys, right? It's always good to have more money available.
So my point is, when Perry's the nice thing is when Perry's contract expires is when all of those guys come off their RFA deals.
Yes.
So you can repurpose that 8.62 that's in
But what
Perry,
if you were using that 8.62 to have a really good player, and on top of that, you have cap space?
And the whole issue is if you're using that 8.62 on that really good player, then you can't reuse that 8.62 on all those other players.
Well, right now, that 8.62 is getting you a player who doesn't really do a whole lot for you.
Agreed, but right now you don't need not that it's you don't need that, because you need good players, but that's not hurting your cap. That's not making it too difficult for you to put together a roster. The Ducks are in a spot where you can deal with a negative value contract when you have guys on ELCs, because ELCs provide the best value for you, best value out there, because you're getting a guy under $1 million that's going to be way out producing if they pan out on that ELC. And so this is one of the few times that you can bite the bullet and deal with that overpay. And it's only 2 more years. It's not that long. And the other thing is, like I said, once that contract is up, Sam Steele is up, Max Jones is up, Maxime Comtois is up, Isaac Lundestrom is up. It sets up perfectly to repurpose that 8.625 into those players. And Getzlaf also comes off the book then. So maybe that's your argument there, is that Ryan Getzlaf also comes off the books. He's not going to be making 8.25 on his next deal. He's going.
But he will probably get. I could see like a Joe Thornton contract situation.
Yeah, 3 to 4. But maybe those $4 million from Getzlaf get repurposed. But still, we don't know where the cap's going, how it's going to rise. I just don't foresee this as, if the Ducks are moving Perry to get cap space this year and then repurpose it into a free agent, I just don't see that as logically making a whole lot of sense, projecting out the long-term cap situation that this team is in. Because that is when you get into issues like the Toronto Maple Leafs are in, where you sign a Patrick Marleau to a $6 million deal because you don't assume that Austin Matthews is going to be making as much as he is. You don't assume Mitch Marner is going to be making that much. And instead of planning out that long term like the Ducks could do right now and say, hey, yes, it's great that it would be great to use this cap space on someone, but we really shouldn't. And so the thing is, it expires. So to me, the whole idea of this being for a cap purpose does not make any logical sense.
Well, I don't think you can say it doesn't make any sense, but you can definitely say that it doesn't make total sense, right? Like, I think that there's an argument to be made that, that they're not really saving as much money as they think they are. And I do agree with you on some level that it seems a little excessive with the amount of cap space that they do have.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer that having cap space is a weapon, that having cap space is an asset. And right now, to me, having significantly more cap space, being a team, because look at teams like Vancouver, look at teams like Ottawa right now. They're in on every deal. They're in every discussion because they just have a ton of cap space. They haven't really done anything to warrant that. The Ducks actually have a core. They actually have something that they've built that if you insert a top talent into it, or you're able to take a problem off someone's hands to add assets, I just think that cap space is just a net positive in almost any scenario.
I don't necessarily disagree.
If you utilize it, obviously, right? So, but I don't think that utilizing it simply means you go out and get an Artemi Panarin. They may not even be able to get an Artemi Panarin, even if they had all the cap space in the world. But I just think that on principle, I would rather have the added it's not just like a little more flexibility. It's a lot more flexibility in the next 2 years.
But let me ask you this. Play this situation out. Let's say that deal happens. They trade him, and then we were just talking about simply the fact of Corey Perry on this team versus Corey Perry off this team and using that cap space. That was completely ignoring the fact that they would potentially be giving up a first or second round pick to do this. So
they're probably not. It's probably not going to be a first. I would severely doubt that.
Who knows?
If it was the extra St. Louis, if it was the St. Louis pick, for example, I mean, on its face, it doesn't look great, but I don't think that it's necessarily the end of the world to lose what could be the 30th, or is it going to be 30th, 31st, or is it 29th at this point?
29th,
anyway, it's a very
because it's the San Jose pick.
San Jose pick, and so it's just, I don't know. I think that it's good to have a lot of picks. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I'd be crazy. I'd be wrong if I didn't value them. But I do think there is a point where you can overvalue just having that pick, especially if the Ducks are in a position that they're in now where they do have that extra first. So I think you have a little more flexibility there. And if you have the opportunity to give yourself, if you have the opportunity to give yourself the cap space to go and add a player or make an offer sheet for a guy who's already better than the guy you could potentially draft with that pick, to me, that's worth it. Of course, it's all contingent on them using it.
Yeah.
But to me, that, you can't look at it and say, well, what you can't evaluate it based on what ends up happening. You have to say, well, looking at it now, on principle, what would I do? And to me, I would consider it a lot more. But that's just me. And again, and hold on, and just basically, this is all in one scenario. We spent a lot of time on this, but this is all just in the scenario where you're sending him to a team that takes on the entire cap space, which is probably, we don't know yet, but it's maybe not the most likely scenario.
Yeah, and why am I lost actually the question I was going to ask you on this entire. Oh, I remember now. If the Ducks were to make that deal, and then they end up not using that cap space at all, does that change your opinion on the deal?
Well, it doesn't change my opinion of the deal itself. It changes my opinion of how they played it out after, but I would sign off on that deal in a vacuum. It's just, I can't be held accountable for what they do with it after. That's the way that I would look at it. Here's the thing though. That might not be the most likely scenario. Although Ottawa's name has been brought up more than a few times, it's maybe just more of a logical connection. All the cap space, the fact that it's in Ontario, closer to Perry's summer home, who knows, right? But let's say that Ottawa's totally off the table. I think that there are still a couple of teams that are potential suitors or potential trade partners. But before we get to those teams, our second break of the podcast. Okay, back from the second intermission. So I wrote an article at AnaheimCalling.com that came out today. And the other two teams that I listed, feel free to disagree here, but the other one that I could actually really see is the Philadelphia Flyers. The reason that I say that is the Flyers do have some money that they have to re-sign, but again, I'm going everything I say is just going off Elliot Friedman here, but he's been very aggressive on the podcast lately, 31 Thoughts, saying that
pretty decent source there.
Yeah, I'd say it's an okay source. He's been pretty adamant that the Flyers are going to be aggressive players this offseason and that he wouldn't be surprised by anything that they do. And if you look at the Flyers, they're a team that's squarely in make the playoffs mode at any cost, which you could definitely debate whether or not that's the right way for them to operate. They have a lot of cap space right now. A lot of it is going to go, or a decent chunk of it is going to go to the guys that they have to re-sign. They have to re-sign Travis Konechny. That's a pretty high-profile one. They have Kevin Hayes' negotiating rights right now. We'll see if they actually use that. Ryan Hartman is another guy that I'm assuming they intend to re-sign. Travis Sanheim, Ivan Provorov. So we'll see how much money they have of that $33 million left in cap space. But if the Anaheim Ducks were willing, and it looks like they are, to retain some salary, I could see the Flyers being really interested in Perry. I mean, he fits the Philadelphia Flyers image quite a bit. And this does seem like a management group that's really intent on kind of recapturing the imagination of the fan base, that's really intent on making a hard push at the playoffs. Now, where does Perry necessarily fit in their lineup? I think that's a problem they're willing to work out if he comes on. But the Flyers do have some, not an excess of young assets, but I could see them being the type of team that's desperate, not maybe desperate, but definitely gung-ho enough about making the playoffs to offload a future asset to bring on a Corey Perry with some retention. What do you make of that? What do you make of my armchair GM there?
I honestly don't know if a team would give up a future even for him at retained salary.
Wow, you're really down on that. 4.3?
Simply, Corey so Perry? It's kind of funny here.
Well, a future could be anything. I'm not saying they're getting a first-round pick out of it.
Yeah, no, I know. But it's kind of funny here, kind of the conundrum I've found myself in, is one of the biggest Perry defenders out there over the last couple of years. I've heard it.
He doesn't have any trade value?
But I've heard it from everyone that, like, he's awful, this guy sucks, he's bad, he's not good anymore, all this different type of stuff. And if that's the common perception of the player, that's probably the same perception of him around the league. Even if looking at the numbers that I look at and different things that you and I will look at, I can say, no, he's still good.
His numbers aren't even that good.
No, his numbers aren't that. We're not that great this past year. I'll admit that.
The last 3 years, but yeah.
Last year. Take it easy. Take it easy there. But the fact is that if that's the perception that people have, that's probably a similar perception that general managers have.
How much of this is based off of our Georgie Con?
I don't think a lot of it's based upon George and his hatred of Perry.
I don't think that GMs around the league think Perry is some terrible player. I think that they view him.
I think they view him as negative value.
Contract.
I think they view him as negative value.
But if you cut that cap hit in half, 4.3 for what he is, that's a lot more feasible. Now, again, I don't think. Jake, you're really driving me crazy here with the Corey Perry's still good, but he's also not worth a second-round pick.
So it's because
which one is it, Jake?
I think at 4.2 he is worth picks, but that's my own personal opinion, not looking at the overall value of him. Well,
here's the thing. Again, you have to factor in the right dance partner, and that's why I think, like a Flyers, there's a little desperation there. That's why I'm
fair.
I'm not saying that in a vacuum this deal makes sense, but I'm saying, who could you sell on the idea that Corey Perry can still be a contributor? And on the Flyers, he wouldn't have to be the top guy. He might actually be in the perfect spot with the Flyers, and maybe even on a third line.
And they did lose Wayne Simmons, and they're going to lose Wayne Simmons.
And he is kind of a Wayne Simmons type player. And the Flyers are orange and black, like the Ducks.
Yeah.
So there's that to consider. Another team, this is my last team I'll throw out there, the New York Islanders. This is a little bit more of a stretch because they have some big contracts to ink this summer. Anthony Beauvillier, Anders Lee, Jordan Eberle, who we don't know is staying there or not. Sounds like he will. They have to re-sign those guys. We don't know yet what they'll do with Robin Leonard, but they do have $27 million in cap space. If the Ducks do retain the maximum 50%, I could see the Islanders, again, another team that is just trying to make the playoffs. I could see them, especially with an old school GM like Lou Lamoriello and arguably an old school coach like Barry Trotz, interested in a guy like Corey Perry at the right price. So those are my two teams. Again, though, and this is something that now I want to. Well, okay. So before we circle back, do you have any candidates outside of the three we've discussed here?
I mean, Pittsburgh maybe. I could see Jim Rutherford trying to bring in Perry.
You have to factor in the crazy level.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to think of the craziest GMs, and I don't want to use crazy like disparaging, but like the guys who are really intent on making something happen.
Yeah.
Right. So Pittsburgh's one you're thinking of?
Maybe Steve Yzerman.
Detroit.
Simply because...
Does Detroit have to make a push for the playoffs this season?
No.
Are they at that point in the rebuild?
But I think they're at the point in the rebuild where is their cap space at right now? I believe
$13 million.
So they have
They don't have to re-sign anyone notable, but next summer they have a bunch of RFAs that are going to.
Are there contracts coming off the books though?
So that summer, yes, they have Jonathan Erickson's 4.25. They have Trevor Daley's 3.1, and they have Mike Green's 5.3. So they're going to have about $12 million opening up to re-sign Anthony Mantha, Andreas Athanasiou, Tyler Bertuzzi. Those guys might be expensive, but again, like you're saying, they may already have a baked-in cap situation there that they can handle. And so you think Detroit's a candidate?
I think Detroit might be a candidate simply because if we're looking at it as he wants to go close to home, because Detroit is actually the closest.
Very close.
It is the closest team to London, Ontario, where Perry, it was reported, just bought his new home. And
you've done the Google Maps research.
I've done the Google Maps research. And so if Yzerman wants to try to weaponize the cap space to get some extra picks or maybe a prospect, so if we look at a deal that actually, speaking of Steve Yzerman made a couple years back, moving out Valtteri Filppula, and Filppula at that point in time had a $5 million cap hit. So let's just say, for instance, the Ducks retain enough to where it's a $5 million cap hit. Filppula maybe was a little bit lower in terms of points and things like that. But there's a comparable there. If you were to get it down to $5 million, the Lightning had to trade an additional 2 draft picks. I believe it was a 4th and a 7th to Philadelphia. And they got Mark Streit, which was a bad contract in return, which they then flipped for a 4th round pick. So basically, they had to trade a 4th and a 7th along with Filppula for a 4th. So essentially it was Filppula and a 7th. So that kind of, I think, leads you to believe that it's probably Perry and a 7th at if the Ducks were to retain to $5 million. So I don't know if that's worth it for Detroit at $5 million, but maybe they're a team that looks to take the full value if they can get a 2nd round pick out of it.
Right. I mean, this coming draft, they have already 3 2nd rounders. So they have their own, and then they have the Islanders and the Sharks 2nd rounders. So for them, there's definitely going to be some interest to add a 2nd rounder. Now, I do wonder for Detroit, I don't really know. I haven't really followed closely enough the mindset of Yzerman for next season. Is it about making us maybe not actually making the playoffs, but at least making a push for them? Or is it about, because if I were them, I would just try to be bad for another year and just try to get the kind of blue chip piece that I don't really think that they have right now. I mean, you could argue Philip Zadina is that guy, but you probably want another one of those guys to really have a fleshed out core. So I guess that furthers your argument that for them getting a 2nd rounder, it gives them another bite at the apple in the draft.
You know what might not be an awful idea if they're trying to clear out money. If Detroit is Perry plus a 6th for Mike Green.
Interesting. The Ducks are a little barren at right defense.
And Mike Green has only 1 year left on his deal. They can stomach 1 more year, or 1 year of a player.
But would you, Jake, would it get the Jake stamp of approval? That's what I want to know. Because Mike Green is very much present value. It's not even close to a future.
No, it's not even close to a future. So I would not like that deal personally. Just something that's popped into my head. I'm looking at
Detroit is trying to offload Mike Green.
Yeah.
That is something that we've heard many times. So who knows? Okay, I think that we could sit here all day and try to speculate of different suitors, but those are teams that come to mind, certainly. The last thing that we need to discuss here is the buyout possibility.
And it is now on screen.
Do you want to break down what a buyout would look like?
Yes.
Just purely cap-wise here.
For those of you that don't know, in order for a buyout to happen, there's specific buyout windows. So it's from June 15th to June 30th. And I believe there's one actually in August also, but that can only be used for teams that are in arbitration. So if an arbitration awarding happens and then that kind of screws over their cap, I believe that they are allowed to They have a window where they could buy out a player if they wanted to. So if the Ducks were to buy out Corey Perry this year, the way it works is it's essentially 2/3 of the contract, remaining contract value, spread out over double the amount of years. And so instead of it being, instead of it being $12 million that they would pay out over the next 2 seasons in terms of actual hard money, they would pay out $8 million over 4 years. So actual money, the Ducks would save about $4 million. So, but if you were to look at the salary cap, because the way it kind of works is, I forget the exact formula, but the way it works is, or breaks down, is this upcoming season, there would be a $2.625 million cap hit for Corey Perry. The following season, 2020-2021, a $6.625 million cap hit. And the 2 after that, only $2 million cap hit. So basically, the Ducks would have $6 million in savings this upcoming season, but 2 seasons from now, they would have only $2 million in savings. So basically, even with that $6 million in savings they get this year, they can't exactly go out and spend it simply because they kind of lose all that space.
That's the Mike Green. That's the Mike Green space right there.
Might be, but that is if they bought out Corey Perry.
Right.
Mike Green would come in potentially a trade. But that's the point, is it allows them to do something this year, but is it really worth it for the Ducks to do something this year? But
it also helps them do something the year after, just not nearly to the same degree.
Only $2 million, and then you have a $2 million cap hit.
Well, $2 million is a backup goalie.
Then you have a $2 million cap hit for 21-22 and 22-23 when you would have nothing. And so, to me, a buyout only makes sense if you really want him off the roster and if hard money is an issue.
Right. So that's the thing. That's the kind of caveat, is that ownership would save money in a buyout. They would only have to pay $11 million of the remaining money. So I think the difference there is, let's see here,
$8 million.
11 million of the 15 million in hard cash.
8 of the,
that is due to him.
No, it's 8 of the 12.
8 of the 12? There's 15 left. If you include the bonus.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's a $3 million signing bonus. But so the
You're
point,
correct.
so this is where we're at, Jake. We've spent an hour here just about talking about all the possibilities, all the ramifications. But you know what this really comes down to? And this is something I wrote about in my article. The Ducks just want Perry out. Like you're not really going to get anything for him. You're not really going to save that much money. You may or may not be able to do something with the cap space that you might free up. You're probably not going to get the full cap hit freed up without giving up something, which seems, like you mentioned, a little fraught given that you're supposedly in a retool. So to me, they've just drawn a line in the sand that they want to move on from this player because of some mostly intangible reason. I mean, to me, yes, you're opening up space for younger guys. Yes, you're saving a little money, but they must really not value what he can bring to the team next season if they think that those things are more worth it. That's why not in a roundabout way, but spending all this time talking about it, to me, why it's so frustrating and can be so weird and confusing is because there's not an obvious benefit. If the Ducks were contending and they, like you said, and they needed the cap space, then yeah, absolutely. Open up that 8.6, trade the second rounder. And maybe that is what they're thinking. Maybe the retool's already over. Maybe they're gunning for a playoff spot next year. They have a core. If they open up that spot and go do something with it, maybe there's an upgrade here that we're just not expecting.
Yeah.
This team isn't really that well positioned for a retool anyway. They still have Getzlaf's contract. They still have Kessler's contract. They still have
LTIR for Kessler,
sure,
needs,
but
though.
They still have to pay it. They still have
potentially
Fowler's
not.
contract.
Potentially not if it's insured.
Okay, well, we're not there yet. Fowler's contract. They still have Henrique's contract. So, and they just re-signed Jakob Silfverberg to a big deal. So they're not really in a retool. They're just kind of floating around. They're going to see what they have in their youngsters next year. We still have no idea who the coach is going to be. We thought we would after last week. We still don't. So to me, they may still be trying to make the playoffs. And I just, the only takeaway that I have from all of this is they just want Corey Perry gone for one reason or the other.
Yep. And one thing I did want to make mention of, sorry, we kind of glossed over this a little bit, when we said they are going to be saving $4 million, or saving money, hard money, if they buy out Perry, as compared to if he were, they're going to save it as compared to his actual contract. But then again, you're paying that money to someone to not play on your team.
Right. It's still a sunk cost, no matter what.
Right. If you were to trade him at full value, then you have no sunk costs at all. You may lose an asset. If you trade him at 50%, you're saving a fair amount of money on that contract. Basically, even though the buyout saves them 2/3 of the contract value, they're still paying the most in that option, I believe.
By a significant margin.
Yes.
And so that's the thing. I just think that it hurts to say this, but they don't see any value in Corey Perry as a member of this team right now.
I completely agree with that, and I disagree with the logic behind it. I disagree with the thought process behind it. I think that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me on a my own kind of level, but I think that's where we're at, and I think that's, at least on my own personal level, there's nothing I can say or do about it. So let's kind of where we're at with this pod is we've speculated on what's going to happen because he's being moved. His last days as a Duck have passed.
Is it weird to think that he's played his last game as a Duck and we just didn't know about it? We just didn't know that it was his last game when it happened.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
And the fanfare that Kessler got a little bit with 1,000 games, kind of sad. Really sad. Actually,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, on that note, Perry won't play 1,000 games as a Duck. 988.
Yeah.
988.
Yeah, that's tough.
And especially with all that they made about the fact that they wanted Kessler or to let him play his 1,000th game, that was a big deal for him. That's why they played him. Kind of sucks.
Well, and again, that's the weird thing about this, right? Is that, and this kind of circles all the way back to our initial conversation, or to our initial, the way we started this podcast, is that maybe there's a little fraying with this relationship. You know, if Corey Perry really wanted to stick this out, he could just say no.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the thing is, you need both sides to play ball here for anything for us to even be at this point. So if Corey Perry wanted to get, that's why I don't think we should frame this as, oh, the Ducks are, they're railroading Perry. They're just kind of kicking him to the curb. I don't think he wants to stick around either. I mean, if that's where we are, I'm sure he would rather, and again, keep in mind, this is all speculation. I don't know Corey Perry, but I'm sure that in a perfect world, he would finish out his career as a Duck.
Yeah.
And
when he signed that deal, he probably was expecting to play out the entire deal as a Duck.
I'm sure if you went back to the press clippings of that day, there was probably something to that effect. But so clearly, if we're at this point, it's because he maybe doesn't value all of that stuff either. Maybe he's like, you know what? If this is going to be messy, we might as well just move on.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily fault him for that.
And one thing I do want to make mention of is there's a whole lot of speculation out there. Well, the reason why buyout's being said is it's a scare tactic. So that
he actually makes more money in that scenario.
Yeah, because
then he would become a free agent.
Exactly. So you put it best so people are saying that it's a scare tactic and that will get him to accept a trade and move his no movement clause because then he won't be bought out and he'll get his full value of his contract. But if you think about it, if he gets bought out, he gets 2/3 of his contract, and then he'll get another contract because some team will sign him.
Right. Well. So I think that in the Stevens article, he was quoting an NHL source, an executive saying that right now,
something like that.
Right. That on the open market, he thinks Perry would get $4 million a year.
Yeah.
So I mean, another $4 million in your pocket, maybe a little signing bonus in there. Buyouts are great for players. Just ask Rick DiPietro.
Yeah, seriously.
You could basically live off your contract.
Vinny LeCavalier. I think Vinny LeCavalier, wasn't he bought out 2 separate times and was collecting 3 paychecks basically? Am I remembering that correct?
I want to be bought out. Does someone want to buy me out? Oh God.
Yeah.
I don't work on a contract, unfortunately. But yeah, so it's all real tough. I think that just when Eric Stevens actually miraculously got access to Ryan Getzlaf to comment on the story, which again maybe indicates that the franchise is pretty okay with all this being discussed. Ryan Getzlaf said that this is a hard day for all of us, and that good things come to an end. And I think that in the rare case where you're Steve Yzerman or a Joe Sakic, it's really rare. Or I guess a Nick Lidstrom is another good example. Hey, look at that, Detroit. It's really rare that you have kind of a storybook ending, even for a guy like Henrik Zetterberg. He and Marian Hossa ended for medical reasons. For Pavel Datsyuk, there was a little dispute there, and he went over to Russia. Matt Sundin ended up getting traded. It's really, really rare that you see the storybook ending, and that's kind of what we're finding out for this version of the Ducks. And again, I don't necessarily, if you just don't value what Corey Perry can do for you on the ice next season, it's a defensible move to just completely move on from him at whatever cost, in my opinion. Because if you just value whatever added space, whatever added flexibility you have over having him play for your hockey team, then by all means. I mean, I think that that's a perfectly defensible position. Again, is the timing right? Is this and that right? Certainly you can quibble with that, but it's all shocking, to say the least. Anything else you want to add here to finish out? I think we've just passed the hour mark, so might be time to wrap up.
Not really off the top of my head. Ken Pafu asked us jokingly, since you guys obviously aren't Ducks fans, who do you root for? With talking about all this Perry trade and all this different stuff.
Is that a jab at you?
A little bit of a jab at me for not defending Perry enough. It's sad. It's really, really sad that he's getting moved. It's sad that he's not going to be in a Ducks jersey anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't really know if there's a whole lot more I can add on to it. I think Getzlaf, put it in that article. Didn't he say, like, it sucks? It's sad.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other way around it.
Do you think there's a chance it still doesn't happen? Or is it a 0% at this point?
I'd put it, I think I saw Eric Stevens in a reply to someone say it's like at like the odds of him being on the team at the start of the season are so low. Like 1% probably.
Yeah, I mean, if he's saying that, if Pierre LeBrun is talking about it, the thing is, what I always try to keep in mind when reading reports is that insiders and reporters are usually only telling you a very small percentage of what they actually know.
Yeah.
And so if we've gotten to the point where this is boiling over, there's clearly a lot more there.
Yeah.
So
this is a very tight-lipped organization talking about this. So yeah.
Right, absolutely. We know that here at Anaheim Calling.
Yep.
Okay.
Really quickly.
Do we want to do some questions or?
We just got this one other question. We don't really have a whole lot. We've kind of hit the whole entire thing. But TD Anderson asked us, when are you guys going to do an in-depth review of prospects of the draft? So I think this weekend we may try to get something together, or maybe next week.
Okay. Okay, Jake.
The draft is next week.
Follow the leader.
The draft is next week, Felix.
I love how a non-trivial percentage of our planning happens as we record.
Hey,
I think that's part of the charm of this podcast.
Yeah. We lay our plans out.
The impromptu nature of it. Well, yes. So
whether it's me throwing something out there or you throwing it out there, it happens.
Yes, I think I probably do it more than you.
You do it way more than me.
I'm not going to complain. The 2019 NHL injury draft begins Friday, June 21st. So we're 11 days away. We should probably do something about that. Don't fault us for focusing in on this news because it's pretty big. It's probably bigger than whoever the Ducks are going to draft with their 6th-round pick.
But I do want to make mention real quick. There is really good coverage on our website, AnaheimCalling.com, put together by John Broadbent, put together by CJ Woodling. I think Tony Leo may have written an article also in there. And so a lot of really good work on the website on a lot of different draft-eligible players. So that's a really good place to kind of go to and look up all the different players that could be available.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we haven't necessarily, like you mentioned, dived into it yet, but AnaheimCalling.com definitely has had you covered already, which is a good time to plug AnaheimCalling.com. Check that out as the next days unfold here as we're waiting on coaching news, trade news, draft news. Keep it locked in. to AnaheimCalling.com and also at Anaheim Calling on Twitter. Do we want to get into plugs yet, or do we want to answer questions?
I want to answer this one question.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis asked us, Blues or Bruins, Game 7. Who you got?
Oh, God. I think that the Blues really dropped the ball in Game 6. Oh, my goodness, they dropped the ball. I mean, they couldn't get anything going offensively. Jordan Binnington was not good.
Pick a team. Pick a team.
But I'm going St. Louis because I hate Boston.
Damn it.
I'm going St. Louis. I probably just jinxed them. To reverse jinx, I'm going Boston.
Do you want to put a bet on this? Because I was going to say St. Louis. So what
I want St. Louis to win. I don't want to bet. I don't want to put money on Boston. I want St. Louis to win. I'm betting St. Louis. Maybe in my heart of hearts, I think Boston will win, but I'm saying St. Louis because I want to.
All right.
This is all about Jenna Fisher.
No bet then.
That's what it comes down to.
Team Pam.
Team Pam. Screw Jim.
Jim's mean. Who wants to be friends with him anyway?
Jim,
Team Pam.
Jim sucks. Jim is a sarcastic asshole. Why does everyone love Jim? He's just an asshole.
Team Pam.
Rolls his eyes at everyone. Makes sarcastic remarks.
Is mean to Dwight. Makes Dwight's life a living hell.
Dwight is a great person. Anyway, yes. So I go Blues. Disappointed in the Game 6 result, but by the way, Jordan Binnington, I think he's at a 9-10 in the playoffs.
He's had a rough go of it lately.
Yeah.
Oh, TD Anderson also makes a good point. Team John Hamm.
Yeah. So I'm all in. Too bad they couldn't get it done at home. I think you always want to see a home win, but I would also relish the opportunity of shutting up those Bruins fans.
Yeah.
Who might be too busy beating each other up anyway if you've seen some of the clips that came out from Game 5.
Because, getting hit in the head with a towel, that's way worse than fights.
Oh, God. Oh, I'm not even going to go there. Okay. Any last thing before we officially wrap up?
No, I think that's it. I think just the plugs are, we got a new Apple Podcast review. That was a really nice one. And so for those of you out there, first off, should mention, we're on Twitch. All the live streams are on Twitch. Interact with us in the chat. Find us at twitch.tv/acpod. By being a subscriber, you get special emotes next to your special emotes in the chat, special badge next to your name, and it's completely free if you have Amazon Prime. Just you have to subscribe every 30 days with Twitch Prime, and it helps out the show a lot. And especially in the off season when it's going to be a little bit more scarce, we really appreciate you guys giving us your support on there. And so we also have our Patreon, patreon.com/acpod, where we're doing a breakdown of every division in the league. And so we have 2 more to do. Those 2 will be during this month. Which division will we be doing next?
The Central and the Metropolitan.
Yes. So, and then the other way you can support us is by leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. And so we got a 1 this past Monday from Peter Withrow. Gave us 5 stars, said hands down the best Ducks podcast, said I'll cut straight to the point. It's crazy how much content these guys pump out. Not only that, they're always up to date with the current rumors and news involving the Ducks. It's really nice to have a podcast where 2 knowledgeable dudes talk hockey so in depth. The fact that they have a podcast for every game is nuts and shows incredible dedication. My hat's off to their work ethic. On a personal note, living in Virginia, literally as far away from Ducks Nation as you can be while still in the U.S., it's great to have a go-to source for all things Ducks. Plus, it's nice knowing you're not the only Ducks fan in the world, LOL. Long story short, if you love Ducks hockey, you'll love this podcast, so give it a listen. Thank you so much, Peter. That was really, really nice of you, and we can't thank you enough.
Yeah,
we do this for all of you.
That was really nice. That was really awesome. We do appreciate it, and also shout out to Virginia. Big shout out, the Commonwealth of Virginia. I should add. Is it a Commonwealth? I think so. Anyway, so on that note, we are wrapping up here. Like I mentioned already, AnaheimCalling.com, at AnaheimCalling on Twitter. Check out Jake on Twitter. That's at ReindeerGames91. I'm on Twitter at Felix_Sicard. We will have all the links in the the description for the pod, so check that out. Yep. I have a couple articles. I have an article out right now about the Perry trade, so check that out. Jake, anything
go watch
out for?
Go watch the Women's World Cup. Let's say that. Women's World
Oh,
Cup.
wow.
U.S.
Nice plug.
U.S.
Nice
starts
plug.
playing tomorrow.
We should start doing that. A random plug.
Go watch the Women's World Cup.
Random plug at the end.
USA Thailand, I believe, are tomorrow at 11 a.m. 11:45 a.m. Go watch it. Go
watch,
USA.
Go watch Warriors Raptors Game 6.
Yeah, that's definitely not a random plug.
Warriors in 7. # Warriors in 7. Yeah, it's not random at all. It may seem random to some who are just listening. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch you at the next pod.
Bye.